Hello. I'm very grateful to be at the end because I think you've had a very rich week of finding different ways to answer this question. For me, it is the essential question of this time. It has been framed for you in different ways, but around the topic of bravery and being fearless. Is that right? Okay, I'm in the right place at the right time. And for me, bravery is not something you decide. Bravery is how you respond in the moment when confronted with a decision or confronted with a crisis or confronted with very troubling news. Courage, I hope you know this, comes from the French word for heart. And so for many, many years, I and others have said, courage is not something you think your way into. Courage comes when your heart opens. But in my own work now, knowing that in Hindu, Tibetan, and many Eastern languages, the word for heart is the same word as mind. It was silly Descartes who decided that the heart and the mind are separate. But there was wonderful research done many years ago now in India with some Tibetan monks. And it was done by a Western researcher who was tasked to study compassion and the power of meditation. And he went to Dharamsala. There were a lot of very high-level monks, very good meditators. And they hooked up all these electrodes to one of them because they wanted to test his brainwaves, but in part of their study of understanding the role of compassion. And as they were hooking him up, all the other monks went into hilarious laughter, and they thought, well, this is just because he looks so strange sitting there with electrodes popping out. And they said, no, it's not that. It's you're hooking up to the wrong area. It's here you should be testing. So courage comes from the heart, which is also the mind. It's not about the brain, it's about mind. It's about awareness, tuning in. And it's all one thing, and you've already known this, right? So when we say that courage comes from having your heart open, it's having all of you become conscious of a situation that needs a response. I want to talk about those moments when we really can trust ourselves and have confidence that we're making the right response. So that's where we're going to go. But I want to give you a moment to think about how would you describe what you've learned here? Put it all together. What you've learned about being brave and what might be an essential requirement for acting bravely. Thinking now of taking this home, going back to work. Can you summarize in your own mind, heart-mind, what has been an essential learning? How do we become brave? How are you brave? What did you discover? I'd like to hear a few things, please. Honesty. Can't hear you. Fearless. Purpose. I should be able to understand you, but there you go. Thank you for translating. Purpose, yes. Acting, knowing your purpose.
Not being scared to be brave.
Not being scared to be brave. There's a new U2 album out. I'm going to show you a clip at the very end. It's my warrior anthem now. But one of the lines from another song is, we cannot afford to be afraid of what we fear. It's quite a strong line. Any other responses? Integrity? Yes. Found? I thank you for sitting right there. Yes. Having a value-based approach, which relates to the purpose of why are we doing this? Why are we struggling? Which is where we find our integrity. This is all one piece, one cloth here. So I have been asking this question of leaders for a long time now. I'm just wondering if I have the right YouTube. We'll see. But we have to answer the question in terms of noticing what time is it. This is a question that was offered by Grace Lee Boggs, who was one of the greatest American activists in our history. She died at age 100. I was with her at age 98. She was still fully cogent and hosting a great conversation. She was in every movement that America had from 1951 onwards: labor, feminism, civil rights, and then on behalf of Detroit, where she lived. So this is for me, a quite important question, because we have to decide what's going on in this world before we know what is the right response. What are we brave on behalf of? I mean, that's the question I'm holding. It came out in some of your responses. So there are many ways to understand this time. Gandhi did 7 social sins in 1924. So it's nearly 100 years old. But he wrote it out on a piece of paper just days before he was assassinated in 1945. So I consider this to be his last testament to us, to the world. See what you think. We have politics without principle. Let me put the whole slide up, and then if you're modern, you'll just get your phones out and take a picture of the screen. But I'm happy to make my PowerPoint available also. I like to spread the messages. Wealth without work, commerce without morality, pleasure without conscience, education without character, science without humanity, and worship without sacrifice. What do you think? Is this an accurate description of how you're experiencing this time, or just notice which one leaps out to you more than others? They're all interrelated, right? If you have pleasure without conscience and education without character, you get commerce without morality. Easily. But just notice which one leaps out to you, because that must be something you're dealing with in your own workplace. Do you think there's anything missing? And just because it's nearly 100 years old, I would like to state we cannot retreat to the, see, it's always been that way. Because these things now have a different level of intensity, and they've come together in a very destructive, powerful way. So, but what's also interesting is when we think about addressing one of these, like education without character, well, then we come up with an easy cause and effect and say, you know, we should just educate children around character or nonviolence or giving them a sense of purpose. You can't just single out one of these, because at this point it's an interconnected system. So we need to understand this is in response to what time is it on the clock of the world? It's this time. And it's this time with a new intensity and velocity that makes working much more difficult and requiring bravery and requiring fearlessness. I do want to say I've done a lot of work in training people to be fearless, and the ultimate truth about fearlessness is you have to feel fear in order to know fearlessness. You have to encounter the fear, know what you stand for, and then act, even if you're scared. We'll talk about that. So here's my other slide on what time is it in the clock of the world. I believe this is a very scary slide because it's how we're treating people. It's how we're framing leadership through measurement, through non-descriptive treatment of all people as not individuals, And as robots or cogs, these are old examples, but they're ever more true to me. And one of the things that has intensified this view of people is this: dashboards. How many of you are suffering with dashboards right now? You're in the government? Of course you are. Is there anyone here who doesn't know dashboards at this point? So I think the way we treat people as masks, faceless masks, as data points, results in this rush to have superficial data that does not fully record all the interactions or all the critical elements. And instead, this is hypnotic for a lot of leaders because it looks so slick. Or they're held accountable. Are you held accountable for measures that you know are foolish or don't give you what you need? Yeah. There is an article on my website that I wrote a long time ago. I wrote it 12 years ago on measurement. And there's a lot of things on my website. I've created it as a library, margaretwheatley.com. I encourage you to go there. But the purpose, I'm not anti-measurement. People need measures. People need to know when they're making progress. People need to know what they're learning. Measurement can do that, but not this way. Not simple measurements about numbers, numbers of people, number of visits, number of reports, number of budget numbers. All of that is completely distracting, but mesmerizing. I don't know what you're seeing here. I don't know how severe your the hypnosis of measurement is yet, but if it's not here full-blown, it will be very soon. This gives you a sense of control, right? In an uncertain, uncontrollable world, which requires brave leaders, this gives you a false sense of confidence that you know what's going on, and you just manipulate some numbers and you get pretty charts. Does this feel familiar to you? And has it already depressed you, or am I new to this task of depressing you? Yeah. This is part of what we need to know in order to answer the question, who do we choose to be? We need to face the reality that is beckoning to us to become brave, conscious leaders. Because this is part of the destruction of the human spirit, part of the invisibility of who humans are and what we're able to contribute. Nowhere on this is what one of my friends, Angela Blanchard, who's one of the best leaders in the world, working deep in community, summoning the human spirit to create healthy communities. She's now retired, working in refugee camps and working with people after natural disaster. She calls them the shipwrecked, which I think is a very evocative title. And she said every human being on the face of this planet, if they're in a refugee camp, if they've just lost everything in a flood or fire, every human being wants to earn, learn, and belong, by which she means our inherent spirits, those that leaders can summon. Our inherent spirit is we want to earn our way. Nobody wants to be dependent, because you know how depressive that energy of being done to or accepting welfare. You know this. You've seen the impact here, as we've seen in every developed nation, of what a welfare state does to human motivation and self-esteem. So Angela's saying everyone wants to earn their way. They want to contribute. That's the energy that leaders have available. But everyone also wants to learn, because that's human nature. That's really part of the purpose of life, is to learn and grow and discover more and more possibilities. And then everyone needs to belong. Belong. We are a communal species. No argument there. I've just been in South Africa and Zimbabwe for several weeks, where the concept, not in practice, but traditional concept was Ubuntu. Have you heard this word? Ubuntu means, I asked this question a lot when I was there years ago. What does Ubuntu mean? And some young man just looked at me and said, well, it means being human. But other definitions are, I exist through you, and you exist through we. Archbishop Tutu said, we exist in a bundle of belonging. You have this opportunity in Wales, like few places do. You're small enough, you have a culture that is continually now growing its identity. It's a very rich place here. But working with that communal spirit that I exist, we exist in a bundle of belonging is one of your opportunities. One of your opportunities. It doesn't exist in my country any longer, where we're just completely living in parallel universes. So as we answer the question, who do I choose to be? What do I choose to be brave on behalf of? I hope you recognize you have great opportunity here in Wales. Great opportunity. I also want to announce today a new organizational award that bears my name, and it's the Organizational Award for Sane Organizations. And I will certify your organization as humane, should you win the award, of course. This comes from an egg carton. So one morning I'm in the kitchen and I see this and I start to laugh, but then I develop my whole approach to marketing, which is, if we can do this for chickens, we can do it for people. Okay. So look for this. I'll set out the criteria shortly. But also, this wisdom, I just quoted Ubuntu, which is deep in most African cultures, but in the Maori culture it was very clear too. What is the most important thing? It is people. It is people. It is people. Does this feel how you are focused right now as a leader? You don't have to answer this so you can be truthful. This is a good question for you. Is this part of, does this feel like, yes, I know this to be true. I know that people earn, learn, belong. I know that people are my greatest resource. And then the question is, what's making this so difficult? And it's this culture of data, speed, distraction, fear, anxiety, uncertainty. But this is the basic. This is worthy of being brave for people. So I've just started this with you. You mentioned purpose as a source of bravery. Can you answer this question right now? Or as a result of this week? I would hope so. And if you're not clear about it, that's really fine, as long as you're still thinking about it. As long as this is a really important question for you. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I putting up with so much crap? Why am I so exhausted? Why am I so burnt out? If you can answer that question, the why of it, I would assume that it means you're no longer able to impact the organization and the people in the way that you had originally aspired to. I find this everywhere, that we're in these large systems. You're in government, healthcare, education. We're in these large systems where we can no longer do the work of the system because we're engaged in a bureaucracy, we're engaged in a hyper-political environment, we're engaged in governments where lying is just the norm. You know, 2 years ago, the word of the year was post-truth. Post-truth. I think it should have just been truthfully called, post-truth means lying, doesn't it? Really. That's what we're in. There's no ground. That's why bravery is so important, because there are these shifting sands in the political environment, in communities even, where people no longer expect to be told the truth because nobody knows what the hell the truth is. It's my own version of it. Here's a wonderful quote from many years ago, but I want to put it into Wales right now. When people have confused opinions with facts, right? And in fact, science now in the US is considered an opinion, not a fact basis. That's one of many terrifying things going on. That's been going on for years. So the quote from several years ago is, "You are entitled to your own opinions, but you are not entitled to your own facts." We have to understand that there is a factual evidence basis to what anyone is trying to do. And in this culture of, well, that's just your opinion. I disagree. Well, why do you disagree? Because that's just your opinion, this is my opinion. I don't know what your public conversations are like, but in the US, we can no longer talk to each other. It is an impassable divide expanding every day. That's why we call it parallel universes now. I don't need to depress you with my own depression, though. But just know it's here. So I mentioned my award is for sane organizations. This is the imagery. This is one of my grandsons, of course, that I want to place before you for your contemplation about what am I brave for. So a sane leader, in my book, has unshakable confidence in people, but it's conditional, it's contextual. Our confidence is that people can be generous, creative, and kind, but whether we are generous, creative, and kind, or brutal, competitive, and self-serving depends on the circumstances, depends on the organizational culture, depends on the leadership. I think this is the single most important thing to focus on as a leader, is that phrase, can be. Do you have enough in your experience? I'm sure you do, because you're here. Enough in your experience that gives you unshakable confidence that in the right conditions, those which you have power over, people will show up in this very positive, intensely caring, humane, generous, and kind way. But if you don't have that, then people who show up badly more and more will just take away this confidence. So it really has to be unshakable. We get it first from our experience. And it's not an unusual trait. It has existed in the past. I actually want to read you, let me go back to here, something from the 12th century, just as a reference point for today. It comes from the Iroquois nation, who lived in perfect harmony with the white settlers until they took the wrong side in the American Revolution, and then George Washington, because they sided with the British, George Washington said, get out of here, and he did a scorched earth policy. Our first scorched earth policy was to drive these good people into Canada. And then, that was 1779, then 10 years later, we consulted this Constitution. I'm going to read you just a brief bit of. We consulted it. The founders of the American Constitution consulted this way of leading and used it as a blueprint. So first you're friends with the indigenous people, then you drive them out, and then you take from their wisdom. That's a familiar pattern in history. So this is called the Great Binding Law. It was written 1142. The thickness of your skin shall be 7 spans, which is to say that you shall be proof against anger, offensive actions, and criticism. Your heart shall be filled with peace and goodwill, and your mind filled with a yearning for the welfare of the people. With endless patience you shall carry out your duty, and your firmness shall be tempered with tenderness for your people. Neither anger nor fury shall find lodgment in your mind, and all your words and actions shall be marked with calm deliberation. Isn't this a perfect description of parliaments? U.S. Congress? Not, right? It's stunning to me. In all your deliberations in the Confederate Council, in your efforts at lawmaking, in all your official acts, self-interest shall be cast into oblivion. Cast not over your shoulder behind you the warnings of the nephews and nieces, should they chide you for any error or wrong you may do, but return to the way of the great law, which is just and right. Look and listen for the welfare of the whole people, and have always in view not only the present, but also the coming generations, even those whose faces are yet beneath the surface of the ground, the unborn of the future nation. Every time I read that, I just grieve for where we are. This world of greed, self-interest, separation, that is destroying relationships, is destroying the planet, and is destroying the whole social fabric. That's where we are. That's partly my answer to what time is it? And in response to that, I want to draw our attention now to faith. I don't mean religious faith. I don't really care about your religious faith. It's good you have one if you have one. But I want to talk about faith in this beautiful definition. Those are two of my granddaughters. By Levinas, great Lithuanian French philosophe. Faith is not a question of the existence or non-existence of God. It is believing that love without rewards is valuable. Love without rewards. Does that characterize you at times? Or always? This is the basis of being brave, right? You're not looking for a reward. You're looking to do the right thing. But you have to know what you're faithful to. And my most powerful experience with this, that went on for many years, was how this quote, "We are faithful, therefore we are not afraid," how it came into my awareness. This comes from a circumstance where the U.S. nuns, at the time there were 57,000 of them, now they're down to about 30,000, but Catholic sisters in America were attacked by the Vatican. And why they were attacked, it started in 2008, was because of the pedophilia scandal. And the priests decided, let's get attention off of ourselves and onto the women. This is historically what happens. So they decided to investigate what the women were doing. Now, they were having conversations about homosexuality, about Christ consciousness, about women becoming priests, all these very radical. They were also talking about poverty, civil rights, economic justice, social justice issues. And the Vatican saw all of this as rebellious, and their intention was to bring them into obedience. These are the words they used. They were telling the women, you have to come back and we will be the boss of you. And there were times in this, it went on from 2008 to 2015. There were times when you could just feel that if these priests in the Vatican had the authority, they would have burned these women at the stake. It was just that rich in venom and a desire to destroy, I would say, destroy the feminine. I mean, one priest that a friend of mine met in Spain said, oh, those women, they're just angry lesbians. That's how they summed up these women who worked in the vineyard, offering care and succor and Christ's love to the poor. So the men, at the very senior level, this was with Pope the bad Pope, Pope Benedict, not Pope, Pope, the one before. Pope Benedict is a wonderful leader. What was his name? Any Catholics in this group? No. St. Francis is now. It was Pope Benedict. Thank you. So Pope Benedict and these cardinals who are truly prove themselves to be evil in their intention to destroy and to take pleasure in that destruction of the women's power. That's a good definition of evil that I work with. It's people who have an intention to destroy somebody and take pleasure when they do. It's beyond sadistic. So the women, every year, they went to the Vatican to talk about their worldwide activities. You have 57,000 nuns out there, and they're doing very good work. And every year, they would spend 10 days in the Vatican, just bringing their programs to the attention and seeing where they could create synergies. And at this first one in 2008, they were blindsided. They went to the Vatican, and they're meeting with this one cardinal, the embodiment of evil in my mind still, who just surprised them, blindsided them with this, we're going to visit every one of your houses, your chapters, because we want to know what you're doing. So suddenly they were going to be invaded by these visitation committees, as they were called. The women were stunned. They'd gotten no heads up about it. And then they're packing up their computers, their papers, and the cardinal, I know one of the women who was present there, she described it as he came and he leered over them. You have to picture red robes leering over, and said, "You are not afraid, are you?" The women hesitated. They had 3 leaders. They looked at each other, and then one of them said this, "We are faithful, therefore we are not afraid." I now use this as a personal practice, and I'm recommending it to you in your leadership. When you are confronted by fear, anxiety, failure, criticism, the question is not, what did I do wrong? People will tell you what you did wrong, by the way, right? You don't have to ask that question. This is where fearlessness comes in. If you know what you're being faithful to in your organizational leadership context, which for me is I am faithful to the human spirit. I do have unshakable confidence that people can be generous, creative, and kind, and I know I have a big responsibility to create the conditions for that. Otherwise, they're going to show up as selfish, competitive, and ill-tempered and aggressive. I know that. So when I've been in situations where suddenly I lose all my confidence, I'm worried about money, meeting plan, my budget, running programs. I'm worried if I'll get enough people to come. Someone's telling me I'm doing it all wrong. I just go into this as a question. Have I been faithful? I strongly recommend this to you. If we're talking about bravery, fearlessness, this is the only route that I know of. It's not an assessment. It's the deepest inner clarity that emerges. I am still being faithful. I may not be successful, but I've been faithful. That's the difference right there between people who are brave and people who become aggressive and dictators. We may not succeed. We may not achieve these important goals that all of you are working on. But we can at least claim that we know what we're trying to be faithful to, and then this is a question that really takes away the fear and replaces it with clarity. I'm still going to do it. This is, I'm going to give you this one quote here. Václav Havel, the leader of the Velvet Revolution, you know him, right? This is just the perfect quote. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. You will not get your source of courage and bravery from a dashboard. You will not get it from a minister. You will not, and that's a government minister, you will not get it from a new portfolio. You will find your true source of hope, which means just working for what feels right. You'll get that if you know what you're faithful to. So you can see this requires contemplation. It requires going inward. It requires really noticing from before this week, could you answer the question that I have been faithful? I bet you could. There have been moments, certainly, when you have stood up for someone or for a direction that you felt was destructive or from someone who needed your presence. You have already been, in my lingo, frequently, I bet, a warrior for the human spirit. And there will be more and more challenges to this because of this climate of just not even noticing or actively repressing the human spirit. You have to remember I'm an American, and what is going on there now is the age of destruction. You hear about it with children being separated from their parents and put in caged areas, right? You've seen those photos? Then Trump says, oh, those are phony photos. It sounds like he has a whole repertoire of actors who stage these events, including school shootings, by the way. Those are staged, they're not real. This makes me insane. It makes the majority of Americans insane. And we have to know what we're serving, what we're faithful to. And then we can resist, then we can act, then we can vote in November. But we have to know what we're faithful to, because most elections around the world right now, think about whether this is true in Wales, are people voting against something. Like, we don't want that leader. Well, we don't want that tax. We don't want this. But where is the creativity? Where is the possibility? I do think you have more of it here than any other place I've been, really. From several years ago now, working towards a positive future. And yet you're doing it in this polarized, politicized, corrupt environment that is just the world scene right now for leaders. So, what is your faith? Please take this question home with you. Talk about it, think about it, because this is what will give you true fearlessness. This is what will allow you, as Daniel Berrigan, one of our radical priests in the Vietnam War, he went to jail 31 times. Just became a thing to do. Who said, you not only have to take a stand, but then you have to stand there. So that's where I want to talk about the capacities that we need to be able to stand firm, be flexible and resilient and adaptive. Yes, I talked about that with your ministers yesterday. Or the executives. I don't think we had that many senior leaders, never do. But my last quote from Levinas is this. And what this brings up for me is what was just on the screen with Václav Havel. We have the certainty that what we are doing, what we're working diligently for, tirelessly even, against these tides that are really destroying human capacity, we stand up and take whatever actions we can, which I am going to talk about now, but we take whatever actions we can to withstand this tide because we know this is true. We can't act otherwise. When you find that place of I can't not act on behalf of people, as a leader, as a citizen, when you find that place, I'm comfortable that you have the basis for withstanding. You won't lose your integrity. You'll remember your purpose. It's going to get tougher. Maybe not here, but in general, it's getting tougher and tougher. We need more people who feel this in their souls. I can only try and do good. That's what I'm here for. So I want to talk briefly about some of the practices that really can support you. And it is wherever you are, do what you can with what you have. Wherever you are, what is your domain of influence? It could just be a team, a family, could be a community, could be something larger. But define this as where you're going to give your best, bravest, clearest leadership. And then you work with what you have. You don't keep, that's the earn part of earn, learn, belong. You don't keep looking for outside funding. You don't keep looking for praise. You don't keep looking for approval, a recognition. You just do what feels to be the right thing as a leader on behalf of people. And here's the best advice. The way you lead is you're relying on human beings, going back to Grace Lee Boggs. Oh, I didn't put up that quote, did I? The way she defined all of her activism was that we relied on human beings. So that generosity, that caring, that kindness that we do have available. But I want to direct your attention to some specifics. The first is, it's a little ironic. I've been known as a big systems thinker for most of my career, which is now 45 years, believe it or not. And here I am talking about islands of sanity. But that's because I have answered the question, what time is it on the clock of the world? And I think the only opportunity for real change now is not at the big systems level, but at the level of local. And that's you as leaders or as team members. So the first thing here is to know that what you're doing stands in direct opposition to general trends. You're focused on people, not blind, superficial numbers. You're focused on promoting generosity, kindness, and creativity, where the rest of the world is focused on control, oppression, and denial of our human capacities. You stand apart, but as I read the Iroquois quote, this is ancient knowledge here. We're not the first to want to lead in progressive ways. I was a leadership consultant in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and this was possible then. We could do participative management. We could do engagement strategies. We could do thinking. We could take time. All of that has disappeared. So these islands now are, I would say, revolutionary, but also radical in that they're going back to foundational truths about how you lead people. But you have to make that identity clear, not only to you, but to your team members or staff. You're really trying to be different here because you know what works to support the human spirit. And one of your roles, and I'm going to give you 2 questions for this one, is to keep watching how the whole island, it starts to sound like a Survivor show, by the way. I'm good with that, reality TV. But you're the only person who's interested and able to see what is actually materializing in the dynamics as people interact, as people face opposition, as people get exhausted. You can notice those dynamics and do something about them. That's where these questions will come up in a moment. And the thing we watch the most, what we notice is, what are we learning? What are we learning? I have been horrified for many years now by how little learning goes on in organizations, how little goes on. And yet, if you think about the rest of life on this planet, living and learning are actually in biology or synonyms. Because that's how we survive, right? We can't just blindly march forward executing a plan. I think execution is the right word here, but I mean it in a different sense. That we're just destroying possibility, we're destroying life, we're executing things. How much learning goes on in your organizations right now, or your teams? Could I get anyone that feels good about the amount of learning going on? Isn't that horrifying? Isn't that horrifying? And it's indicative of the work you have to do. I'll get to that. But just think about that for a moment. How can you survive if you are not learning from experience? We're not thinking any longer. And we're therefore not learning, and therefore the future is very clear, unless we reinstitute learning. That's an act of bravery, because people will tell you, no, I don't have time. Nice idea, no time. This is a real act of courage to insist that you get together periodically and learn from what just happened. A real act of bravery. And I always feel stupid having to say that asking people to think is an act of courage. Really, look at this situation. And to be vigilant about the quality of relationships. So I'm going to give you now a few questions. These are all important. I'm just stating their importance. If we had more time, I'd go into more specifics, but I think these are the big 2 questions. So as you're keeping watch over the whole organization or the whole team, community, family, this is the question. What's the impact on relationships when we do something? We take a decision, we set a new policy, we act in response to a situation. What is the impact on relationships? And you're the only one who's going to be asking this question. Your bosses aren't going to be asking this question. Dashboards don't track this. But you know from your experience as a good leader already that all of these things that we do, these actions that we take, create impact. We call them unintended consequences generally. Where suddenly we make an action and people get thoroughly pissed off at us, we didn't even know they cared. Or I'll give you a British example. I read this a few weeks ago in The Guardian, that with the austerity measures in Britain, in England, I'll use that term advisedly, in England, there have been such severe cutbacks that local councils now have to come up with money to support the things that they used to get funded for. So what they're doing, this was what the point of the whole article, is they're selling off parks, community centers, and other places where people came together. So that's a direct impact on relationships. Nobody's looking at it. They're just looking at, when it was presented to one of the officials, a local official, look what you're doing. You're destroying the logic here is you're destroying the potential for community, which is a resource we need. And he said, no. The logic is only 2 plus 2 equals 4. And we no longer have 4 in our. So we had to cut these things. So this kind of thinking is for you to bring in. There are others out there who will join you, but this is a primary responsibility. To notice and then speak out, that's true bravery for me. Not random, but very focused. And the second question to ask, in whatever your organizational domain is, that I would call an island of sanity, how do we respond when something goes wrong? Please answer the question right now. Think about your own work, organizational setting. What happens when something goes wrong? Something goes wrong can be, someone comes down on you from the top, you lose a budget line item, you get bad press, someone slanders you, someone attacks you on social media, or the government just decides not to fund a program you really care about. What happens when something goes wrong? I'd like some descriptors. Blame? Fix it. Yeah, fix it. Yeah. What else? Control, yes, they go for more control. Investigation, official commissions, yes. Restructure. Hide it. Yeah, hide it. These are all critical things. What was here? To learn. That is the only right answer. And I bow down to you. Yes. How many times when something goes wrong in your part of the organization do people gather together and try and learn from it? And then apply those learnings so we don't get engaged in Einstein's definition of stupidity, doing the same thing twice and expecting different results. What I see happens, you've covered it all, I'm just going to review what I heard. People either restructure, blame, I'm going to talk about that specifically, hide it. Maybe they deny that anything went wrong, or they try and get attention off of it and start something new. All of that learning from experience, which any other living system would engage in, all of that is just disappearing because of time, politics, this culture of lying, opinions only, polarized relationships. You can see where this culture acts against creating the conditions for learning. But my greatest experience with learning was a moment when I was working in the U.S. Army. I had this wonderful position of working for the head of the U.S. Army when I was being pilloried in other places for being to a woman. And it was when my first book came out 26 years ago, so it was just too soft, fluffy. It was all about science, so I never got that criticism. But I was invited in to look at the Army, and boy, did my status rise in the eyes of male executives after that. But what I learned there is what I want to describe to you. It was a learning event which involved tank warfare. So the troops had been training for months and months at this huge desert area, and it was going to be a battle, not with live ammo, but a real battle in which it would appear on your screen whether if you'd been ambushed, that was a physical reality, you drove a certain way and another tank was there getting ready to kill you, and then you'd get the information on your screen. Well, you've just lost 3 men, or you've just been injured, whatever. It was a real battle, but luckily without people getting killed. And the commanding general, we were up on the top of a hill where we could see this huge landscape before us, and we could see the tanks way down there, all the battle maneuvering. And the commander of the whole multi-million-dollar learning operation was walking around that morning, rubbing his hands with glee, saying, a lot of learning going on down there, a lot of learning going on down there. I have never had that experience with a senior leader again. That when something goes wrong, it's not a lot of learning going on here, but instead, how can I restructure? Who can I blame? Who's responsible? I'm not, but who else is responsible? Later that morning, I was sitting with a colonel, all excited that I'd finally found a learning organization. We'd been talking about it for years, several of us, but this was the first time I saw learning in action. And there were other things they were doing that made me relish the fact that I'd discovered a learning organization. So I'm having coffee with this colonel, and I say, this is the first learning organization I've ever been in. And he just looked at me. He was rather complimented by that. And he said, Meg, we learned a long time ago, it's better to learn than be dead. That's your mandate. That's why it's so important to create learning, because it is better to learn than be dead. And that's just where we are right now. Just where we are. We can't keep going on with this destruction of the human spirit. People's capacity, people just signing out, just really in this culture of blame. We can't keep doing it the way we've been doing it. So I just want to offer this imagery. When I address the question of what do leaders need as a whole new skill set, it was we need to have a new identity, a new image of what we're doing with our leadership, how we are using where we are to be of greater service to people. And so the word warrior, which of course has many intimations of violence, warfare, and aggression, we're using in a different way. We're using it that we are committed. First of all, we're using it that we're in a long lineage of warriors that have always existed, that warriors arise depending on the circumstances, but when the people need protection, or the king needs protection, or the pope needs protection. But warriors are a special group of people who are dedicated, in my definition here, to protecting people, and especially against the unintentional and intentional aggression and violence of this time that is really leading to increased aggression, increased levels of suicide everywhere. You know, suicide among teens worldwide is now the second leading cause of death. And there are cultures now in the US, India, and Australia, I know of this, where the age that kids kill themselves is down to 10 years old. Nearly 1,000 children in India killed themselves last year at the age of 10. What is this world? This is a world that requires a few people who are disciplined and dedicated to step forward and do what we can where we are with what we have. So we go back to this definition of sanity, that we have unshakable confidence, but this is an important addition. Our current society has a dark view of human potential and human nature. And as warriors for the human spirit, we rely on our knowledge, our awareness, our experience with people behaving well. And we offer that. You offer that as a leader. When you actually believe in somebody, just think about this, you've already had these moments. You believe in someone and you give them the chance to prove themselves after they've made a big mistake. That's being a warrior for the human spirit. It's not taking the mistake as indicative that this person has no potential. This is, in fact, seeing often potential where the individual doesn't see it. I think that's another definition of leadership I used to work with a lot, that the leader sees potential where people don't see it in themselves, and again, creates conditions. This is the important phrase, creates the conditions for that person to recognize their own value, their own potential. Now, how we do that is by offering who we are. Compassionate, confident, caring, and cheerful. Cheerful doesn't mean faking it. Cheerful actually means we're together, we can do this. And our work is to be fully present. So I'm offering this to you to entice you into your own thinking about how you can do this. This first one is we commit. We're not going to add to the fear and aggression. We're not going to push our agendas. We're not going to force an issue. We're not going to yell at someone. Of course we will, because we're human. But we're watching ourselves. Did I just behave with force and aggression? Did I just provoke fear? It's easy to do that in people these days. I don't want to do that. So that's one of the critical things we watch. You can do this right now. And what I already covered. Wherever we are, we do our best. We're going to screw up a lot. We're going to make mistakes. That's life. It's called learning, if we choose to learn from our errors. One of my spiritual teachers gave a whole talk on a quote, which was, fail, fail often, fail fast. I know of one corporation in America that has adopted this. We just want to fail faster. But if you're not learning, you're just going to fail more. That's where learning is survival again. And finally, this is the payoff. Joy is possible when we're truly together. Joy is an experience not of outer circumstances, but of working in harmony together for some common good. My experience with joy began when I was interviewing people who'd been part of disaster relief efforts in the US. They had rushed in to help. They had experienced bodies floating by them. This is Katrina. Bodies floating by them, people dying on rooftops, the floodwaters still coming. Really violent, harsh experience. And yet they would describe that time as the most joyful, meaningful time of their life. I was puzzled. Now I'm quite certain that joy is available in whatever circumstance when we are together. When we are together. Because we're not acting from ego, we're not acting from self-protection. This is true unity at work, and that experience goes back to Ubuntu. That's the richness of being human together. No concern for self, just clear work that needs to be done. And those are joyful experiences. Now, we can't recreate disasters. There are enough going on in organizations anyway, but we don't need to create disasters. We just need to know that when we are working in concert with one another, that's where we're going to find joy. And those moments may surprise you. You don't have to have them consistently. They are so nourishing that you get on with all the rest of the work. But this is not happiness we're talking about. We're talking about a fundamental human experience of joy, which is feeling in community with one another. So, Here's what I ask you to think about. What are you faithful to? What is the ground on which you can stand in the midst of all this uncertainty and groundlessness? What is your faith? I think you need to explore this for a while. Don't go for the first easy answer, and just test out whether your faith has been tested and you've stood on that ground and you've taken a stand. And I'm not talking about looking for, epiphanies. But when have you stood up for a person at work? When have you challenged a policy that you knew would be disastrous? When have you gone the extra mile and then the extra mile and the extra mile because something felt so right for you to do? That will show you what you're faithful to. So it's little moments where you see it, and it's big moments. And then the second group of questions is, what are the things to watch in your workplace that, if you keep track of them, will create a healthier place, an island of sanity, where people can be creative, generous, and kind? I drew your attention to relationships because we exist in a bundle of belonging, and that is the ultimate, initial and ultimate factor for people. We need to be together, but these organizational lives we're leading are just separating us more and more. And I asked you to be the ones who pay attention to relationships. And then one of the big questions, take this back to your teams, to anyone interested. What do we do when something goes wrong? What do we do? That question, if answered truthfully, will give you the most possibility, the biggest bang for the buck. Do you use that phrase? Because you don't have bucks. The biggest bang for the pound. That is the question that will yield the most insight to you is, what do we do when something goes wrong? And I need to tell you that all this talk about fight or flight and reptilian brains is not true. We're taking pleasure in it now because it kind of justifies our bad behaviors. But 15, 16 years ago, a group of women at UCLA in California noticed their own behavior. They're in a faculty department and they just lost a big grant. They noticed that all the men fled. They went into their offices, didn't want to talk about it. But all the women went into the kitchen and started talking, consoling, strategizing, whatever. And they said, well, this isn't fight or flight. Now we've added freeze. This isn't fight or flight or freeze. This is something else. So they went back to the original literature, found it had only been done on male subjects. They then either did their own research or found studies that included women, and they doubled our repertoire of response. And it's not about the amygdala then, because they said that women generally, beyond fight or flight, women generally go into the kitchen and talk. And so they named this pattern tend and befriend. So we have fight or flight, yes. And we have tend and befriend. That's much better news for us as a species. I know lots of men who tend and befriend as well, and I know lots of men who disappear into their offices. But I just offer this to us as very good news. We can use these tendencies to gather together, to learn and not freeze, flee, or dissolve into fear. Because we know what human beings are capable of. And that's where your leadership is needed the most. So I wanted to end by what I now consider to be my Warriors for the Human Spirit anthem with U2 just came out in December. The lyrics to this song, I think they'll be very clear, but the main chorus is, there is a light we can't always see. There is a world we can't always be. There is dark we cannot doubt. And there is a light, don't let it go out. So I don't know which of those lines I like most, but they're all very powerful to me. So did you like that? I find it so moving. But it's our role. We're working for a light we can't always see. We're working in ways for a world we can't always be this way. But in all of this, our faith is that there is darkness, that's the reality, and there is light. And we can be that even in the darkness. So I just want to leave you with what is now my gravestone. What would be on my gravestone, except I don't plan to have one. This is just slight detail. But it's a wonderful quote from an anonymous source, which is, we were together, I forget the rest. I forget the rest. So let's stay together in this work. Thank you very much.